Welcome to the You, Me, and BTC podcast, episode 29. Today we have two interesting topics to talk about: Bitcoin banking and free market reviews. Although many dislike the idea, it really would be possible to create banks for Bitcoin. They would function almost exactly like the bank you use for your fiat currency, accepting deposits, making loans, and paying out interest. Some want to avoid this at all costs because of the flaws rampant in traditional banks, but could they maybe work better in a free society? This leads us to a fascinating discussion about product and service reviews in a free market. People would want to know which banks are better or worse, but how would they know? And when someone says a certain bank is good or bad, how do we know if that person can be trusted? The internet provides some revolutionary resources for this kind of situation. Stay tuned for this amazing episode. Your hosts are Tim Baker, John Stuart, and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go.
Hey everybody, this is the You, Me, and BTC podcast. Now I'm doing this intro for the second time because Tim's a fool.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my house is retarded.
So today we have an article from Forbes. I think we've done a few articles from them before. This is by a contributor named Eric Moo, I think is how you say his name. If I'm wrong, don't hang me or something. Anyways,
Racist bastard.
it's called Major Chinese Exchanges Poised to Roll Out Bitcoin Banking Services. So, as any good headline should do, I guess, it tells you what's going on, but it's not that interesting. So, I guess basically he's focusing on, it looks like two Chinese cryptocurrency exchanges called OKCoin and Huobi, maybe, is how you say that? I don't know.
Huobi, maybe? I don't know either.
Hoibi, I don't know. Yeah, something like that. Maybe we'll have it written out so you can read it, since we're fools. But, yeah. They've just unveiled, basically just banking services. I guess, yeah, it's gonna have kind of the normal things that you see with banks, like paid interest and loans and things like that. It looks like. The tone of the article is kind of not really in support of this banking move. The contributor says that one of Bitcoin's main strengths is to get away from banking, really, and away from centralization. But I don't know. I mean, you guys can weigh in on this too. I think even if some people start moving in this direction of more like banking services, and we were talking about fractional reserve before we started recording, even that kind of thing, I don't think it's only as dangerous as people let it be, because it's not going to change anything about the protocol. It's just how people decide to use it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, with Bitcoin, I think it becomes, I guess with anything, it really becomes as dangerous as we let it be, but like with the system we have now, no one even really thinks about it anymore. So fractional reserve banking is kind of just the norm. We were talking for a little bit before we started recording, and I think it was Daniel who said, like, you could do all the same kind of bad stuff with Bitcoin banking, but it would have to be off the blockchain. Like, it would almost, I guess the way I'm thinking about it, the bank would just be issuing their own kind of tokens and say you can exchange this here for a Bitcoin, but there's not really any reason to even start doing that, really, besides just them wanting to print, or not wanting to print, them wanting to be able to loan out more money than they actually own. So I don't really know why any of their users or customers would ever do that, or would ever agree to that sort of thing. I get like why you'd want to store it someplace where you think it'd be safer, or if it's just to get interest. But I mean, it would definitely depend on me on how much interest you're getting, and I still think the safest place is just to put it on a paper wallet or some way that's not connected to the internet at all.
Yeah, I think I don't think safety would be one of the main reasons that people would do this. Although, I mean, that could be a reason. Maybe this bank has insurance, or maybe you just trust them more than you trust yourself, which is pretty stupid, I think. But maybe you do. But yeah, I think one of the main reasons that most people would want to use a bank is because of the lending and because of the interest. On one hand, you can either gain interest, or if you're the one on the other side of the deal, you could take out a loan or get credit or whatever. So, and people do want those things and use those things. People like to gain interest, and people like to borrow money and spend interest, or get charged interest, I guess. And so, yeah, and I think even in the Bitcoin economy, just because we don't generally like banks, or at least the traditional banks, there are still going to be people who want to do those things, and that's fine. Personally, I don't think I would. I think it's stupid to give your coins to other people, especially like we saw with Mt. Gox. I think, that's not necessarily true, because I still keep a little bit of coin with other people, like with Coinbase. I keep a little bit there, and I don't really expect to lose that anytime soon. Although I definitely, of course, it's possible. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's up to the people. It's a risk. If you want to take that risk, sure, go for it. If you don't want to, then you don't have to. It's up to the users and the people. I personally think it's pointless. Not pointless, but not for me. And I think that a lot of the people who do get into this are probably going to get bitten or whatever, just like with Mt. Gox. Bad things could happen, but I don't necessarily see it as bad in the same way that I see traditional banks as bad, I guess.
Adding on to what Daniel said, like you said that like banks, normally we look at it as bad because they're like stealing something from you. This, like you said, just kind of seems like it doesn't really accomplish anything, so why would you do it?
Yeah.
I guess you already said that, though.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, an important concept of it, I guess, is that it'd be more of an opt-in type of thing. And yeah, Daniel said that it would be a lot more transparent than, I guess, the kind of fractional reserve stuff that we have going on now, because you would be able to compare what's going on with the blockchain and kind of see what's happening. And Tim, the thing that he said earlier was that, like, it's kind of become the norm, so we're all just used to it. I think with this, it like allows for this kind of fractional reserve banking, but it's not. I don't think it would ever necessarily become like that, where it's just like you don't notice it because it's everywhere. It would be a lot easier to see what's going on, which is a benefit. And I think if you're gonna do fractional reserve, that's like really probably the most important thing that you would need to be able to, I guess, do it in a way that's right, if you think that it can be right, I guess.
Yeah, it's actually, that's a pretty good point. And I would say, even aside from, federal banks, where if you listen to the show, you know that we don't exactly agree with anything federal. But so aside from those, even the bank on the corner is still generally opt-in. It's still generally private, although there is way too much federal stuff in there, I think. But generally, most banks are private to an extent. And so, yes, and they are opt-in. And so those are good things about generic banks. But the benefit I would see to Bitcoin banking, and this is what I was talking about before the show, is transparency. And the reason I think Bitcoin banks would have more transparency is because with the dollar, any money in your bank, you don't really know how it's fractionally reserved. You don't really know how it's managed. And even when you do make a transfer, you don't consider the fraction at all. You just, if I send $100 from my bank to John, or even if I get money out at the ATM, I think the ATM's a better example, because I will get 100 real paper dollars, like actual, not fractionally reserved paper dollars. But in my bank account, they were fractionally reserved. My point with that is people don't think about the fractional reserve. They have $100 in the bank. They can get $100 out at the ATM. They never, ever think about the fractional reserve. They never realize kind of how things are off balance and stuff like that. With Bitcoin, that's not possible because anything that is fractionally reserved cannot be on the blockchain. You cannot fractionally reserve with the blockchain. Now, you can take things off the blockchain, and that's kind of the opt-in thing. If people want to trust your off-blockchain trading, and if people want to bank like that, sure, go for it. I mean, personally, I think you're going to get burnt, but whatever, go ahead and try it. So,
well, I
was just going to say that's where the transparency is, because with Bitcoin, you'll see that it's off blockchain. You'll see that it's not a real Bitcoin. And that's why it's different from with the dollar, where you don't really think about or see the fractional reserves or anything like that.
I think it does go back to trust in the banks, but like saying we're having like a Bitcoin bank and they did want they wanted to engage in fractional reserve. As far as I understand it, I'm trying to think about it, because the way you were saying it was kind of, I mean, that might be the better way of describing it, but the way I understood fractional reserve, you can't fractional reserve $1. You do it to like what you have. Like fractional reserving, I think, is just, or maybe this is a really simplistic explanation and maybe it's not right at all, but you just lend out more than you have. Or no, you lend out. How does it? Yeah, I'm sorry.
This is a good chance to explain it then, because I guess our listeners might not fully understand it either. The original form of fractional reserve is when I say original because it's the first one I can think of. Maybe an expert can take things back farther, but in my mind, the original form of fractional reserve would be when somebody didn't want to carry around all their gold, so they put it in the bank and got out slips of paper. So you could have 100 ounces of gold in the bank, and say 10 different people who are using the bank each have slips for 10 ounces. So 10 people, each with 10 ounces, there's 100 ounces in the bank. Cool. Yeah. You can use those pieces of paper to trade and as if it was real gold if you trust the bank, and sure, everything's fine. And actually, that's actually a good example of the reason I'm saying that Bitcoin banking is better than dollar banking, because obviously, when you're trading with a piece of paper from a bank, you know that it's not an actual ounce of gold. You know that it represents an ounce of gold from this bank, and they may or may not be able to redeem it. I mean, generally you trust them. Generally you would say they are able to redeem it, but you don't know that for sure until you actually go there. Okay, so that's what I would say is the original. I guess that would be full reserve banking. But what happens then is over time, the banks can say, oh, hey, why don't, every day only 2 or 3 people come to the bank and really want to trade out their paper for gold. So why don't I print 100 more pieces of paper? I could say I have 200 ounces of gold, even though I only have 100, and they could lend them out and do it however they wanted to do that. But because they trust that not everybody is going to come and claim their gold all at one time, then sure, they can give out 200 pieces of paper without too much fear that they will ever really run out of gold in their stores. That is fractional reserve banking. And the way it happens now with dollars, it's not with gold and with pieces of paper, it's with real paper dollars and with numbers in a database somewhere that represent your bank account. They have so many paper dollars in their actual reserves, but in everybody's bank accounts, if you added them all up, I have no clue how far beyond their actual reserves it would be. My guess is it would be way beyond, but people don't think about that. People don't notice that. And if you change $100 from one database record, say that's my bank account, and if you move $100 to another database record, say that's Tim's bank account, nobody ever thinks about the fact that there weren't really that many dollars behind the trade. They see that as 100 real dollars and don't even think about it. But with pieces of paper that represent gold in a bank somewhere, then everyone has to think about the fact that they're trusting the bank and stuff like that. But with a dollar, we don't do that. Does that make sense, Tim? Do you see how that's fractional reserve?
Yeah, I understood the gold thing because I had never thought about it really as how it exactly works now because there isn't any backing. To the
best of my knowledge, I could be wrong on this, but the way I've always seen it is the only real kind of dollar that is not fractionally reserved, I think the only way is with paper money or with coins or whatever. I don't think, because I think you have to have a paper dollar. I think that's the only kind of non-fractionally reserved dollars. Or no, I shouldn't say non-fractionally reserved dollars. I should say non-reserved dollars. I mean, maybe some banks do full reserve, but I think the only kind of real dollar is a paper dollar. I don't think the mints can just create accounts and create electronic dollars. Because if they could, then why would they ever print money? I don't know. Yeah. So I think the paper dollar is like the gold, and the electronic records and the bank accounts are like the slips of paper.
I'm sitting not even thinking about, I'm thinking, oh, it's bad that we just have a bunch of dollars. Then you remind me that we don't even have dollars sometimes. We just have digits that say they're for dollars.
It's like originally the paper itself was the representation of a reserve somewhere. Well, now it's even more of a joke because the paper itself is like the hard currency and it's reserved in some other virtual way. And yeah, that's mind blowing. And when you think about it, it just kind of reminds you how sketchy the dollar really is, or any kind of fiat currency is. And it just, I guess, reminds us that we need something that is a lot more legitimate. Although you could even take that one step further. You could say, okay, originally the paper represented something physical, and that was how, money was reserved. Now, with the dollar, the paper is kind of the gold, and it's reserved by something digital. Well, actually, if you could even take that a step further and say now with this Bitcoin banking, the hard cash currency thing that is being reserved is some digital virtual thing, and the representation of that thing, which originally was the piece of paper that represented gold, well, now the thing that represents the hard currency, which is Bitcoin, I guess that would be another database, another list of numbers. I guess it would be similar, but it's just weird.
Could they just give out token? Or, I mean, it doesn't say at all what they do, but...
Yeah, they could do paper money, too, for Bitcoin.
Oh, that's true, and that'd be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, but, like, that actually makes more sense to me than just electronic tokens for it. Although, I mean, I was just looking a little bit further down in the article, and it said something about Kipcoin, which... They set their fundraising cap, whatever that exactly means in this situation, at 10,000 BTC, and it pays out an interest of 0.0137 daily. So I feel like a lot of this stuff is... I don't know, that only seems to make sense if you have a lot of them and you don't have enough time to just trade. Because I feel like if you have a lot of Bitcoin, you probably got into it early enough, or maybe you're just one of the people who are already trading it all the time anyway, and you could probably make a lot more money doing that, because at least Kipcoin, it says the only way it makes money is it makes money in two ways. One, by arbitrage, buying from exchanges where prices are lower and selling at others where prices are higher. And two, lending coins to the miners, which he says, the article author says that he doubts the arbitrage was really sustainable for them. He thinks that most of their money is coming from lending the money that is deposited with them for miners to set up mining farms.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole idea of gaining interest on any amount of money is going to be attractive to people. And I think people are going to do this. But the thing is, I think it's going to be more... I think we're going to see things like bank runs and stuff like that. We haven't seen those in the dollar economy in probably really at all in my lifetime that I can think of. bank runs are kind of considered an old-fashioned kind of thing when the banking was this gold money and paper money kind of situation. But like I said, this new Bitcoin banking is actually a lot more similar to that, because the difference between gold and a piece of paper is a lot more obvious, just like the difference between a blockchain Bitcoin and a off-blockchain Bitcoin is. And so I think it kind of is taking us back to this old-fashioned form of banking where it is a lot more risky, where it is a lot more, I don't know, kind of Wild West. Banks failed all the time when they were reserved like that. And I think they're going to fail all the time with Bitcoin banks too. Just like we already have seen with Mt. Gox. I mean, it wasn't technically a bank, but they were, I don't even know what they were doing with their reserves, but they definitely weren't fully reserving them, or at least not securely or openly, or I don't even know. But the point is, it's going to be a lot more wild, a lot more risky. Although, for me to say that that's risky is like me saying that the dollar currently isn't risky, which I think it is.
Yeah.
So
I think it, just because of the blockchain stuff, I think, like we were saying at the very beginning of this, it's as risky as we let it be. Even before Mt. Gox, this should have been the case, but especially now, I don't see, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I would really hope that not too many people are willing to go into a bank that doesn't say, okay, this will show you where although, I don't know, that could maybe be a privacy issue too, is like how a bank would always show how much money they had, because you wouldn't want to have it all in one address, but you could have it in a bunch of different, I don't know, do you know what I'm talking about at all?
So
yeah,
I might, but yeah, try and say it again.
I think it'll be less risky now versus what people think of as like the wildcat banking stuff, just because of the blockchain, because banks, I don't think anyone now, especially after what happened with Mt. Gox, is going to go into a bank not somehow knowing that the bank doesn't have all the money it says it does.
I think I know what you mean. So you're saying with the gold paper situation, yeah, people knew they were reserving their money with someone else, but other than going to the bank, they had no way of knowing if the gold was actually there at all or how much was there, aside from actually going there and trying to redeem it. Whereas with Bitcoin, because of the blockchain, a company like, say, Mt. Gox could have said, hey, these are all of our addresses. This is how we can prove that we own these addresses, and this is how much money is at these addresses. So 24/7, you can keep an eye on those addresses and see how much money we have, and you'll know that there's at least some money in Mt. Gox. Is that what you were saying, Tim?
Yeah, so I would think it'd be a lot less risky, because I don't think people are going to really go to banks that aren't willing to do that.
Exactly.
Like, if you're not willing to do that, that's indicative that you're probably not doing something.
Right, and I think you can even take it a couple steps farther. Now, I haven't researched this a ton, so I don't want to say too much because I could get things wrong. But I know I've heard people talking about ways that not only could Mt. Gox have proven that they had X amount of money on X addresses or whatever, but there are some cryptographic ways that I've heard about where you can prove, kind of, not only show that you have so much money on whatever addresses, but a company could also put together kind of a record or a list of all the accounts that are under their control. Like, say, all the Mt. Gox users could all kind of keep track of how much money is supposed to be in Mt. Gox. So not only can you see that Mt. Gox has money, you can also compare that number to the amount of money that people kind of have in accounts there. And that's how you could keep track of the fractional reserve. Well, you could say these addresses have 100,000 Bitcoin, but all the accounts add up to 120,000. So, you could say that that's a bad thing, or you could say that it's okay, but at least then you know what the fraction is and how everything's going down. Now, I have no clue how all that works. I have no clue where it is in development. I have no idea if anybody's using it or how long it will be until it's available. But the point is, yeah, like I was saying, not only can you see that Mt. Gox has money on the blockchain, but there are ways to kind of keep track of the accounts there too and see how it compares with the amount of money that they're supposed to have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. I mean, someone might even start up like a business or I don't know if you call it a business, but just, I guess, like a watchdog group. Or I guess it could just be like a rating thing, just a rating thing for Bitcoin banks.
Yeah, I guess it's just all about transparency.
Yeah, and actually, I'm actually glad you brought up that point about the rating agency, because in any sort of free society, that's kind of going to be important. You know, knowing who you can trust and stuff like that. That's not an easy thing to do. And rating agencies, if they're done right, which, you know, in a free market, I think they would be a lot more incentivized to do things right. But yeah, they could do that, and you could know what banks are good and what banks are bad. But also, that made me think of insurance. That's a really important part of banking too. Now, right now we have the FDIC, and they insure like $100,000 of any banking deposit, which to me, that's a joke. Like, somebody can just, how can you have free insurance? Well, only the government can. But with Bitcoin, I think the insurance industry is going to come back, and it's going to be a lot more legitimate. It's still going to be risky. There are still going to be winners and losers, but I think there's going to be kind of an insurance ecosystem that is a lot more legitimate than it is right now. And that's something that people are going to be able to make use of with their Bitcoins. If they're worried about losing them, they could insure them. Now there's going to be contracts, there's going to be agreements, and there's going to have to be arbitration for, well, how did you lose those Bitcoins? Did you just send them away or did they legitimately get lost? And so there's going to be a lot of cool things and maybe even risky things or sprouting up around there. But yeah, that's another important thing, is the whole idea of insurance. And that's something that I think is going to grow around this whole Bitcoin banking industry. You're listening to the You, Me, and BTC podcast. We need your help. First of all, we'd love it if you could check out our website, youmeandbtc.com. There you can find donation addresses for every single article and episode, and we'd love it if you could make use of those. We could also use some fans and followers, so if you're willing, please visit Facebook or Twitter.com/youmeandbtc. Lastly, remember to subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes or sign up on our website to receive email updates. Thanks for your support.
I want to go back to the rating thing. I think the rating thing is hugely important, and it's been a thing kind of in libertarian anarchist circles for a while. I think I've especially seen it talked about when people are talking about things like the FDA and stuff like that, or like people freak out because they're like, if we don't have the FDA, how are we going to know our food is okay and not going to poison us? It's like, well, if this company is poisoning thousands of people, do you think you're not going to hear about it? And I think it's really good with all the cryptocurrency stuff and even with like the distributed network, just that whole idea. We've been seeing a lot of stuff recently about voting, I think. We heard a lot about it at the conference, at the Bitcoin and the Beltway conference, with LTB coin and the Safe network and stuff. People are starting to realize that maybe like voting is a lot better than just trusting like one group of people to figure everything out for everyone else.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like with, I think it was probably Made Safe or maybe LTB coin. Yeah. But yeah, the point is, if people are kind of voting and expressing their opinions, in any format, then it's kind of a way to gauge what people think and how many people agree with what any given person thinks. And that is important for, like seeing what content is good or what company is good. And so, that definitely would work for a rating agency. You could just have people submit ratings and votes and things like that. Exactly. Yeah. Just like with, again, I don't remember if it was MadeSafe or LTB Coin, but it's crowdsourcing kind of ratings and knowledge. And that's absolutely helpful. And now the only risk there, well, not the only risk. I have no idea what any kind of risks there could be, but one risk that I would see is something we've also talked about. Well, how do you know people aren't just going to make a bunch of accounts and spam the votes and say that their company is good or make false reviews and things like that? And, that's going to happen to an extent, but I guess that's the whole point of having, a rating agency or a rating system, is because they're going to develop things, they're going to create systems and ways of knowing what votes are legitimate or less legitimate, things like that. And there are already systems like that in place. I mean, Amazon has their whole system of product reviews, and of course there's going to be fake ones in there here and there, but for the most part, as long as there's more than, say, 4 or 5 reviews, especially with most things, I would say there's easily a couple hundred reviews, and that's extremely helpful. Even if a whole bunch of them are fake, you can look through them, and, it's just extremely helpful of knowing what's good and what's bad, and not just which product is good and which product is bad, but which, you could see the strengths and weaknesses of a given product and things like that. And then another rating place, I guess, that I use a lot is the App Store, the Google. No, I guess it's not technically called the App Store. I guess that's Apple, but I guess then the Google Play Store. And there's ratings all through that. And of course there are going to be illegitimate things there or false ratings or whatever, but that doesn't change the fact that it's extremely helpful and beneficial.
Yeah, in response to that, when stuff is kind of free and out in the open and anybody can rate on something, like you said, there are going to be bad reviews, but I think that problem isn't a huge deal for a couple reasons. One, because it's going to be really, really hard for someone to maintain the illusion that these reviews are actually real for a long period of time if there's a bunch of other people voting on it as well. And the other reason is that, like, you have to be a certain type of person to even be able to benefit from fake reviews. So say if let's just go back to insurance companies or like banks, I guess, because that's kind of the whole topic of this episode. So say there's a bank, like, regular people have no reason to make a false review for this bank. Like, they don't stand anything to gain besides just, like, if they think it's fun to screw other people over by making them trust something bad. But I don't think there are that many people that would really go that far out of their way to do that.
Right.
And so the only people who would stand to gain from it is if the actual bank is doing fake reviews. Well, here's the problem with that. If a bank is falsely reviewing itself, it's not going to take very long for someone to try that bank and realize that they actually suck, and word is going to get out pretty fast that there's a bunch of fake reviews, and that is going to make people hate the bank even more than if they had, like, a bunch of bad reviews. Because people are going to know not only are they not a trustworthy bank, but they're also trying to lie to you to make you think they are trustworthy. So they're kind of, like, then doubly in trouble. And I think that kind of stuff happens really fast. Like, with Mt. Gox, people could tell, like, maybe even like a month beforehand, like weeks beforehand, people were like, man, something shady is going on here. Like, people were seeing stuff happening with Gox before they actually froze everybody's accounts and before they went bankrupt. I think if the rating system is free and you have all different types of people participating in it. Even bad stuff like that can only go on for so long. And yeah, some people are going to lose from it. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, it's generally going to run smooth most of the time. Those are kind of small instances that will get fixed.
Right. I think that's an extremely good point. And I think that is an example of how things could work out, even though there are bad actors here and there, like the banks who might try to leave fake reviews. Couple things I want to mention briefly. First of all, and this, I actually thought of this when you talked about the FDA, because I think, Tim, it was episode 1. I don't think John was with us on the show yet. But yeah, we did a talk about kind of, yeah, exactly what we're saying, kind of review systems and how the FDA is supposed to be a review system, but it doesn't work out and stuff like that. I just want to be brief here because it's a different episode and it's not really about banks. But just to mention, if anybody's interested, check out, I think it was episode 1, but if not, one of the first 2 or 3, maybe, I guess, episodes. And it'll also be interesting. You'll see how much worse our audio and our stage presence was in those older episodes. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say was how I actually have a pretty good example of that sort of thing you're talking about, John, where people who leave bad reviews kind of no longer are trusted. We've talked about Bitcoin OTC on the show before. I
actually thought of that too. I forgot to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a trading IRC channel. Like, it's a really simple thing. It's just a channel, a chat room where people can meet up and make trades. Okay, fine. They have a web of trust where you can leave ratings for people and they can leave ratings for you, and you can see if the people you trust someone else and by how much. And it's pretty simple, but it's really helpful and beneficial. And my example is about this one time where it's a long story, so I'm not going to explain everything, but the bottom line is I found someone who was a scammer. I found someone in the chat room who was trying to scam someone else, a fairly new member. And I'm like, holy crap, this is bad. Let's stop this scam. And there's a whole story I could tell, but the point is I ended the scam. It didn't work out. And the actual scammer, the one who was trying to execute the scam, was naturally really upset with me for ruining his plan. And he left me, I want to say, 15 or 20 really bad ratings, -10, which is the worst rating you can give. He did exactly what we talked about. He made a bunch of fake accounts, or actually, I think all these accounts were already under his control. I don't think he created them just for me, but I got a whole bunch of really bad ratings. And actually, those ratings are still on my account. You can go see them. They could be removed, but I don't want them removed, and the people in charge of the rating system don't want them removed either, just because that's kind of centralization. That's kind of switching the trust method and who you trust and things like that. I don't mind having those ratings on my account because the accounts that left me those ratings have really negative ratings themselves. They have -200 or 300 ratings because everybody knows that it was a scammer. Everybody knows that he was leaving bad reviews. Everybody knows that they were doing bad things. So these accounts all have really bad ratings. So when people look on my account and see a list of 10 or 15 bad ratings, -10s, they know that they are not actual legitimate ratings because all they have to do is look at the person who left the rating and they'll see that person has -200 or 300 rating, and so they won't trust the -10 that user left me. I hope that all made sense. It was kind of complicated. But the point is exactly what John was saying. It's an example of how someone who leaves a bad rating, and especially if they do it repeatedly, they're going to be noticed, and they're going to very quickly be distrusted and ignored and just forgotten.
I mean, I like what you said. I think what you're saying mostly is just, yeah, we need to look at reviews, but then we also need to look at who leaves the reviews. Talking about the FDA thing, I've gone into arguments with people because I'll say something like, it's people I talk to about a bunch of different stuff, and then they've heard me talk about how I don't like the FDA or stuff like that, and then they'll argue with me for something else, and I'll state something like, well, how do you know that? They're like, doesn't the FDA say that? Or doesn't the FDA change their mind on that?
Yeah.
Or where do you get your information from? Well, I'm like, I get my information from different people online. Oh, you just get your information from random people online? Well, I'm like, no, I look at what else they have to say. I look at who else supports them. And if I look at someone and they tell me that, I don't know, Cocoa Puffs are a great way of getting extra magnesium in the morning, then I look who sponsors the person, where their money comes from, anything like that, or if they've said other retarded stuff too, and I make my decision based off of that. I think we just need to put more effort into, if you want. Like, if you're not going to put more effort into it, I'm not going to tell you you have to. It's your choice if you want to risk getting scammed or not, or getting the best kind of information, but you can't just go off of review stuff. Like, if you go even just like Amazon or something like that, and you look at the different reviews, and there's like a bunch of 5-star reviews, and then there's just one that's like, this is horrible. And you're either like, okay, either everyone else is lying, or this guy is lying, or you could just check him, and you find out that he just leaves 1-star reviews for every single thing he's ever bought in the past 3 years.
Can I say real quick a funny thing? Just Tim's Cocoa Puff reference reminded me of this. I actually heard recently, and this also has to do with the FDA. I heard recently that cereal companies have been getting in trouble because they like enhance cereal with too many vitamins and minerals, and it makes like kids sick because their bodies can't handle all of the stuff that they put in there that's supposed to be beneficial. So yeah, good job, FDA. You're doing great.
Well, cereal stuff, they jam a bunch of iron in it because it just doesn't, like, I forget if I've ever seen it. I've heard people say, like, you can crush up different kinds of cereal and then put a magnet over it, and you'll basically pull iron out, because they put it in there because cereal has no nutritional value besides carbs normally. So they're just like, okay, put iron in there, and then we can say it has minerals and good stuff for the kids.
Tim, something I wanted that you made me think of too, like how you just get information from the internet. And yeah, we were just talking the other day about that kind of thing where you were basically saying, I think it was on Reddit you were talking about, and there was one original poster and he left a review or whatever. And yeah, that review might be good or bad. It might be right or wrong. And of course there's always going to be drawbacks, or you might have problems here and there when you're just getting information from random people on the internet. Yeah, it's not always perfect. But the cool thing, and I guess this is nothing new, people say this all the time, but the cool thing about the internet in general, and the fact that you can get information from anyone, is that not only do you have that original poster's review, which, like, say you might have in a magazine, like a book review, you're not just going to get one review from one person who may or may not be an expert, but on Reddit, then somebody replies and they say, hey, this is good too. I agree with this, or I disagree with this. And then 10 more people reply, yeah, I agree with this. It works like this. It does this. It doesn't do this. And they tell you what's good or bad about the review. And then everyone replies to the replies, and it just goes on and on and on. That's a really cool thing about the internet, and about, I guess, the whole, any kind of reviewing or commentary or opinions or thoughts or anything that anybody says can be, reviewed itself. But you can review the reviews and stuff like that with the internet, and that's really cool.
Reddit is actually a really good example, because I've heard people talk about Reddit before, and they're like, if you told somebody about this on paper, like, before it was actually done, people would be like, are you insane? This will never work. But the algorithms and stuff that are behind Reddit, and how everything, all the reviews and stuff, like, work together, it's really pretty insane. And it actually, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff on Reddit. Everybody knows that. But for the most part, it's actually, like, it works really well. Surprisingly well, actually. And I think just another thing to be said of all this, and this is something that's come with the internet that I think is really great, when everybody kind of has everybody starts with the same credibility, I guess. You have maybe, like, I guess, marginal credibility if you're just saying something like just starting out. So like, I guess everybody has the same opportunity to voice their opinions. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's just as easy to read somebody's blog they wrote out of their parents' basement as it is to read something on CNN's website or whatever. And because of that, I think when you realize that, I don't know, I think it makes people more skeptical of things. I think people are a lot more skeptical when you can kind of read stuff anywhere, because you see all the different opinions that are out there. And if you know that there's not really that much difference between somebody in their basement posting something versus somebody at CNN posting something, you tend to be a lot more skeptical of everybody. And I think that's a good thing. And then if everybody's being more skeptical, hopefully they review stuff better. And then everybody who's reading after them gets the benefit of that, of their experience.
Right. Well, actually, and that's a good point. Like, if everyone was skeptical and that was it, I mean, that would kind of suck because, well, then how do you know who to trust? But that skepticism is kind of remedied by what we were just talking about, reviewing the reviews. You can, because there are so many reviews and you can compare them and people can comment on any, not just a review, but any kind of opinion. So you have this skepticism to begin with, and so you read reviews on the review. And so you can see, is that right or is that wrong? Is it helpful, not helpful? So yeah, it's not just a healthy skepticism, but there is a remedy for the skepticism too that is really beneficial.
I was just going to say, there is the potential for this to lead to kind of like existential confusion, because then you're like, well, I need reviews of the reviews of the reviews of the reviews. What is truth? What is truth? But on a practical everyday basis, I think there are a lot of good things to be said about this kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to episode 29. Remember to visit our website, youmeandbtc.com. All of the music in today's show was written and recorded by John Stuart. We'll see you next Thursday for episode 30. Well, no, I don't mind going off topic from banks. I think we've had an awesome discussion. I just don't want to repeat the exact same things we've said before.
Well, now you're just repeating what you just repeated.
Well, I don't mind going off on banks. I just don't.
Oh my gosh. Somebody needs to review this podcast badly.
Yeah, yes, that's what we do need. We need some reviews on iTunes.
Actually, yeah, that's a really good point. If anybody's up for reviewing us, we would love any kind of review or any kind of feedback. You can do that on iTunes. If you just want to post on Reddit and say how bad we are, you can do that too. If you want to leave a post on the forums and say how bad we are, you can do that too. Yeah, go ahead. We love reviews. Even bad ones. We want honest reviews, because the only honest review is a bad review when you're talking about a show that has Tim on it, so.
And if you give a false review, still do that, because we'll expose you, and then you'll just become evidence that we're geniuses and that everything we say is true. We'll prove that you can be exposed.
I'm not sure I followed all of that. I think we're getting into that existential realm of reviewing people and reviewing the reviewers and exposing the exposers and